When Donald Trump got re-elected as the President of the United States, his first move was to deport immigrants, majorly Africans, who have always been a problem in his eyes. All African leaders sat quiet and didn't react, except for one person, Captain Ibrahim Traore. First, he demanded the West send back all of Africa's gold in its keeping, which we covered in a previous video, and now he just shocked the West by paying all of Burkina Faso's debt. Okay, picture this. There's a small African country that most people barely talk about. It's not famous for oil, gold, or big cities. And on paper, it's considered poor, like really poor. Now imagine that same country suddenly says, guess what? We just paid off nearly $5 billion in debt, all by ourselves. No loans, no begging, no deals with the West. Sounds like a fairy tale, right? No, it actually happened. The country, Burkina Faso. And what they just pulled off has left a lot of powerful people scratching their heads. Because let's be real, most of the world still believes Africa can't do anything big without outside help. There's this old, tired idea floating around that African nations need saving, that they're forever stuck waiting for handouts or loans from richer countries. But Burkina Faso just gave that idea a giant reality check. They didn't ask for permission. They didn't wait for someone to bail them out. They just handled it. So how'd they pull this off? Well, back in 2024, the Prime Minister, Dr. Apollinaire Kielem de Tambela, dropped a bombshell. He got up and said the country had cleared $4.79 billion in domestic debt. No help from the IMF. No World Bank money. No strings attached aid. Nothing. They didn't play by the usual rules. They looked inward, leaned on their own people, their own resources, their own economy. And while everyone else was busy doubting them, they were busy building something new. So here's the crazy part. We're talking about a small African country with no ocean, not a ton of global attention, and a bunch of folks who always said it couldn't survive without help from richer nations. Somehow, Burkina Faso managed to wipe out nearly $5 billion in debt. No magic, no billion-dollar gift, just strategy. You'd think a country dealing with security problems and political pressure would be the last place to look for smart money moves. But what they did next flipped the usual script upside down. Instead of going around asking for loans from international banks or waiting for financial aid from the West, they turned to the people who mattered most, their own. The government basically said, hey, we believe in this country, and if you do too, help us fund it. So they rolled out something called government bonds, kind of like an IOU with interest, and offered them to local businesses, banks, and regular citizens. It was a bold move. Think about it. Most governments would never dream of asking everyday folks to help foot the bill for billions in debt. But Burkina Faso's leaders understood something powerful. If people trust the direction you're heading, they'll want to be part of the journey. And guess what? The people responded. It wasn't just about the money. It was about belief, about pride, about taking control of their future and saying, we're not waiting around for someone to rescue us. Even with danger on the borders and tough times at home, something started to shift. A new kind of confidence spread, one that said, we got this. And just like that, the government used its own population, not outside lenders, as the engine to move forward. What happened next? Honestly, no one saw it coming. People inside the country started to believe, not just in their government, but in the idea that they could be part of the solution. Confidence started climbing. Local investors, everyone from small business owners to big banks, began pouring money into government bonds. Burkina Faso had tapped into something that had been sitting right under their nose the whole time. The power of local money. And here's the twist. Most folks think you need fancy help from outside experts to fix a country's economy. But Burkina Faso showed the world a different way, by using what they already had and trusting the people who lived there. Even with chaos around them, conflict in the Sahel, terrorism threats, political pressure, their leaders didn't panic. They didn't run to the usual international lenders with hat in hand. They stayed calm, stuck to the plan, and kept the money flowing inside the country. Usually, when things go wrong, investors get nervous and pull their money out. But in this case, the opposite happened. Instead of bailing, people stayed in. Why? Because the government was doing something rare. They were being open. They were being smart with the books. And they weren't hiding behind vague promises. They said, here's what we owe. Here's how we'll fix it. and here's how you can help. And for once, that message landed. Even while dealing with real danger, Burkina Faso kept its financial house steady. Investors felt that. They could see that someone was actually steering the ship, even through the storm. If you are still watching this video, it means you love it. Why not take out a second and hit that like button? Have you done that? Let us move on. Now here's where things get really clever. Burkina Faso didn't just rely on people's trust, they backed it up with something solid: gold. Yep, the country has gold in the ground, and a lot of it. So when the government asked locals to invest in bonds, they could also point to the money coming in from mining as proof they had real value behind their promises. It's like saying, hey, we're not just hoping this works. We've got gold helping us cover it. That gave investors extra peace of mind. They knew the country wasn't running on empty. But Burkina Faso didn't stop there. While other countries might have caved to pressure from the West, accepting strict conditions, making political changes, or slashing budgets, they decided to do things their own way. They stayed focused on what they believed would work, using the strength of their own economy. Banks, retirement funds, and local companies were encouraged to support the plan. Basically, the government said, if you've got savings, why not invest it right here at home? It's safe, it earns you money, and it helps the whole country. And the response? Huge. Local businesses didn't just throw in money, they started partnering with the government on real projects. Roads, power systems, all the stuff that helps an economy grow. It wasn't just about repaying debt anymore, it was about building the future together. This teamwork between the government and businesses created something rare, a feeling that everyone had a role to play. Everyone was in it together. Meanwhile, behind the scenes, the financial sector was getting a makeover. New tools were rolled out, things like bond options that made investing easier and more attractive. It wasn't just big banks that got involved. Small business owners, even everyday investors, had a chance to join in. The result? More money started pouring into the system. More people bought bonds. More projects got funded. And slowly but surely the country began chipping away at its debt, without calling up the West for help. Let's be honest, paying off nearly $5 billion isn't just about crunching numbers. It's about building something real that lasts. And that's exactly what Burkina Faso did. They didn't just use the money they raised to plug holes and cross off bills. Nope. They started planting seeds for the future. Big ones. They looked around and said, how can we turn this moment into momentum? So instead of throwing all the money at old problems, they started fixing roads, building energy projects, and setting up the kind of systems that help an economy grow strong from the inside out. Smart move, right? Because once you've got solid roads, steady electricity, and reliable infrastructure, guess what? People notice. Investors from outside start looking in, thinking, hey, maybe this is the place to bet on next. But Burkina Faso wasn't doing it to impress anyone. They had a bigger goal. They wanted to make sure they'd never again be stuck waiting on someone else's help. No more begging, no more strings-attached loans, just full control over their own future. That mindset changed everything. They weren't just paying off debt, they were building a foundation, something that would last, something that could grow. And here's the coolest part. The money they raised wasn't just used to pay back what they owed. It turned into a spark for new jobs, new businesses, and new ideas. What started as a big debt became a doorway to something even bigger. Burkina Faso didn't just tighten their belts, they flipped the entire script. They trusted their people, they backed their own markets, and they refused to play by the same old rules that kept so many others stuck. Here's the big question people keep asking. When things got tough, did Burkina Faso get any help from the West? You'd think so, right? Usually when a country's in trouble, dealing with conflict, trying to rebuild, looking for stability, there's at least some support from wealthier nations. But in this case, that didn't happen. When Burkina Faso was going through one of the hardest times in its recent history, fighting off armed groups, trying to fix a broken system, and dealing with a major change in government, the West didn't lend a helping hand. In fact, they did the opposite. Instead of stepping in to help, big players like the European Union and other Western countries froze their aid and hit Burkina Faso with sanctions. No development money, no emergency funds, no backing. just silence and pressure. It was like punishing someone while their house is already on fire. Why? Because the country's military had taken control in 2022, pushing out the old civilian leaders. The West didn't like that move, so their message was simple. You didn't follow our rules. Now you're on your own. And it wasn't just Burkina Faso. Neighbouring countries like Mali and Niger got hit with the same treatment. No support, just warnings and more sanctions. The idea was to make things so hard that the people would rise up and push their leaders out. Burkina Faso didn't fold under pressure. They didn't come running back, begging for forgiveness or loans. Instead, they made a decision that shocked everyone. They said, we'll figure it out ourselves. With the world watching and waiting for them to fall apart, they did something bold. Instead of calling the IMF or asking the World Bank for help, they turned inward. They put their faith in their own people, in local businesses, in their own banks and financial systems. No fancy handouts, no foreign strings attached. Just a country digging deep, using what it had and trusting its own strength. Turning down outside help is never easy, especially when everyone keeps telling you that you can't make it without it. For a long time, that's the story people told about African countries, that they were stuck, always needing someone else to step in and fix things. But Burkina Faso wasn't interested in being part of that story anymore. Their leaders looked around and said, why should we keep playing a role we didn't choose? They were tired of the world viewing Africa as weak, dependent, or always in crisis. So they made a choice, one that most nations wouldn't dare to make. They said no. No to aid with strings attached. No to the pressure to follow foreign rules. No to the idea that their future had to be written in someone else's language. And what did they do instead? They turned to the people who knew their country best, the people who lived there. Banks, businesses, shop owners, workers. Everyone was invited to help build a new path forward. This wasn't about pride, it was about power. The kind of power that comes from believing in your own strength. The government's challenge wasn't just finding the money, it was convincing people to believe again, to trust that their country could stand tall without a lifeline from the outside. That's not something you fix with a speech or a slogan. It takes action. And in the middle of chaos, while dealing with violence, fear, and political pressure, they took that action anyway. Western powers thought Burkina Faso would fold, that eventually they'd come back knocking, desperate for help. But that didn't happen. What happened instead was kind of incredible. Despite the danger, despite the threats, people showed up. Local investors said yes, banks got involved, businesses put money in, they backed the plan. Not because someone told them to, but because they believed in it. The government raised serious funds, not from faraway lenders, but from inside its borders. And with that money, they kept building, they kept working, they kept going. For the longest time, people in powerful countries have looked at Africa like it's a place that can't do anything on its own. Always needing help. Always behind. Always waiting for someone else to show up and fix things. But Burkina Faso just flipped that idea upside down. Instead of begging for money or following someone else's plan, they decided to do something bold. They bet on themselves. And guess what? It worked. They didn't wait for loans from big international banks. They didn't follow every order from faraway governments. They stopped playing the game where Africa always looks like the one with the empty cup. They rewrote the story entirely. And here's the thing. This wasn't just about money. It was about pride, about control, about finally saying, we've got this. We can build our own future. Now here's the part that might make some people uncomfortable. A lot of the systems that keep Africa dependent weren't built by accident. They were built on purpose. Because when African countries keep borrowing, keep asking, keep depending, someone else is always in charge. And while Africa stays stuck in debt, guess who's making the real profits? Western banks, multinational companies, outside powers that come for the gold, oil, land and talent, but never stay to build something lasting. It's been this way for decades. But now Burkina Faso is showing that it doesn't have to stay that way. They've proved that African countries can fund themselves, invest in their own people, and build economies that serve them, not just foreign shareholders. So why are so many other African countries still waiting for handouts? Why keep walking the same path when there's clearly another way? The truth is, it's not just about money. It's about mindset. Some leaders have gotten used to the idea that foreign aid is the only way forward, that without approval from Washington, Brussels, or Paris, nothing can move. But that's changing. Burkina Faso's decision wasn't magic. It was hard. It took guts. It meant turning down easy money in exchange for something more important, freedom. And if Burkina Faso can do it, what's stopping countries with even more resources, like Nigeria or South Africa, from doing the same? They've got strong economies. They've got skilled workers. They've got natural wealth. The pieces are already there. All that's left is to believe that they don't need permission to move. Because maybe the real question isn't can they do it? Maybe the real question is, if you found this video interesting, be sure to hit that like button and don't forget to subscribe.